Hi, my name is Konstantin Baum. I'm a master of wine and I've tasted a few hundred wines already this week. So I decided that today I'm going to drink a cup of tea and answer a question that a lot of you guys have asked me in the past. What are the best wine books? So let's start reading. Books and wine go hand in hand. The first thing that got me interested in wine was tasting wine, but the next thing I did afterwards was to buy a book on wine. Things have changed since I first got into wine, and today there are far more online resources. You can find up-to-date information on wines, vintages, and producers on websites, blogs, podcasts, and even social media. But in my opinion, there's no real alternative to a well-written, well-researched book by an insightful author. I'm not somebody who likes to own a lot of things, and I often feel regret when I spend my money on something that I don't really need. I never felt bad about buying another book, even though I own a lot of books, good ones and bad ones. Today I want to share some of my favorites with you. This is by no means the entire list, but a pretty good selection for all knowledge levels. I will reference all of the books down below this video, as many of you have suggested. My first book recommendation for people who want to learn more about wine but only want to buy one book is this year, The World Atlas of Wine by Jancis Robinson and Hugh Johnson. It was the first expensive wine book that I bought when I first got into wine, and I still recommend it to people who want to learn more about the topic. It gives you a great overview of most of the main wine growing regions, but it also includes a lot of information on viticulture, winemaking, and wine tasting. It was first published in 1971, and since then millions of copies have been sold, and it was translated into 14 different languages. The first author of the Wine Atlas was Hugh Johnson, and I got the first edition of the Wine Atlas right here. Today, Jancis Robinson, another wine industry legend, is helping him with the atlas. The Wine Atlas was not Hugh Johnson's idea, but his publisher Michael Beasley suggested to him that he should write a book with some great maps, and so he did. The book was a runaway success, and it's still very useful even in times when you can look up everything on Google. I really like to go back to the original version in order to see what has changed since the 1970s. Some things have not changed at all. If you look at the intro, it's pretty much the same. And in some regions, like for example in Burgundy, in the Côte de Nuit, you can only see a few changes between 1971 and today, like for example the elevation of La Grand Rue to Grand Cru status with a 1991 vintage. But if you go to the New World, the changes become very, very clear. This book was first released before the Judgment of Paris, and many New World regions are not really featured in a lot of detail. South America, for example, just got two pages for Argentina, Chile, and all of the rest. So the next book is Essential Wine Tasting by Michael Schuster, which is a detailed course book that shows you how to approach a wine tasting, from which equipment to use, to how to taste, to how to recognize the main grape varieties and regions. I bought this book years ago when I worked as a sommelier in Dublin, and it's still the best book that I've read on wine tasting. It goes into quite a lot of detail on how taste is created, and it gives you quite a lot of examples on which wines to taste in order to build your palate. Michael uses interesting metaphors and similes, like for example his comparison between blind tasting and astronomy. Finding your way around wine is like navigating the sky at night. You need to recognize the reference points to get your bearings until you are shown the particular bright star you don't see, the pattern called Orion the Hunter. This book is great if you want to expand your knowledge about wine tasting as well as your tasting vocabulary. Michael also runs a wine tasting school in London, and many Master of Wine students go there in order to learn more about blind tasting. I'm only one of many Masters of Wine who've gone to Michael's class and have learned a lot from him. So the next book is The Science of Wine by Jamie Goode. This is an in-depth overview of the how behind wine. This is for people who really want to learn more about wine and want to get into the science behind viticulture, enology, and wine tasting. It is far less romantic or fun than most wine books, but it is well written and it is accessible to people without much knowledge of science. The author, Jamie Goode, is a wine writer and he has a PhD in plant biology, so he knows his stuff. He breaks the book up into 3 sections: in the vineyard, in the winery, and our interaction with wine, and then goes into topics like phylloxera and ungrafted wines and sulfur dioxide, as well as wine and health. You will also find some images in the book, but it's mainly text, and it's not a book designed to be read in one go. I mainly read it chapter by chapter, and even then I sometimes have to read the same chapter twice. This is not one of those poorly researched wine books, and the information is very useful. He goes into very much detail, and I've learned a lot from this book. So the next book is Wine Grapes, the Bible of Ampelography, and it covers pretty much everything you need to know about grape varietals. It was written by 3 true experts, Julia Harding, Jancis Robinson, and Jose Villamos. It's a beautiful, big book, and it describes 1,368 grape varietals from Aburto to Zweigelt. I've used this book in the past in my videos when I talked about grape varieties, so you might have seen it before. There's a lot of detailed information on the parentage, the origins of the grape variety and where it is grown, and it's just really beautifully made. You can also see the color of the grapes, of the berries in the book, and you can find beautiful drawings of different grape varieties here in the book as well. It is certainly not the first book that you should buy when you get into wine, and some of you might say this is entirely useless, which might be true, but I just had to have it. I really like the detail of information that you can find in this book here, and I also like that they didn't include a more general introduction to the book, but really focused in on the grape varietals. So this is Noble Rot. It's not a book, but a magazine, but I really enjoy reading it, and it's the only wine magazine that I actually have a subscription for. Noble Rot was launched in 2013 by music executive Dan Keeling and my friend and fellow MW Mark Andrew. They really wanted to create a wine magazine that fuses wine with pop culture, and in addition to great articles, they also have beautiful artwork in the magazine. I actually own a few limited edition prints from this magazine, and they are hanging on the walls of my office. So if you want to read entertaining articles on topics like A Wine Lover's Guide to Iran or the top 10 movie food scenes, then this is the magazine for you, and you're a real wine nerd. By the way, this is my favorite cover that they ever did, and I never got the chance to buy the limited edition print for this cover, which is a bit of a shame. Since launching the magazine, they've also started 2 restaurants, which are great, and they've written a book that I can't really review here because I haven't read it, even though it's sitting on my shelf. So last but not least, I have Drunk from Edward Slingerland. It's a wide-ranging, provocative and educational book about the story of drinking. This book does not really focus on wine, but on intoxication in general, and it's not filled with stories from stag parties. Instead, it's a well-researched analysis by a professor of philosophy. This book is one of my favorites of 2021, as Slingerland argues that intoxicants in general and alcoholic beverages in particular are so deeply interwoven in our culture that humanity as we know it wouldn't exist without them. Part of his theory is also that hunter-gatherers might not have settled in order to grow grains because they wanted to make bread, but because they wanted to make beer instead. He explains that intoxicants help solve several distinctive human challenges, like for example enhancing creativity, alleviating stress, building trust and encouraging cooperation. He really tries to solve the question, why do we drink, and he pulls it off without glorifying intoxicants in any way. Key to this is obviously a respectful relationship with alcohol, limiting the consumption of spirits, and more social control, meaning less drinking alone. He explains that the right amount of alcohol can actually enhance your quality of life as well as your performance, and he uses an example that he found in the Silicon Valley, which is called the Baum Peak, named after the former CEO of Microsoft. It describes a very high but very narrow peak of a curve describing a programmer's coding skill as a function of alcohol consumption. Interesting stuff. I hope you enjoyed this video, which was a bit different than my normal videos. If you liked it, then please like it down here. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. My question of the day is, which is your favorite wine book? Please comment down below. I hope I see you guys again soon when I won't be tasting tea, but tasting wine again. Whatever you do until then, stay thirsty.